It started with a faint signal drifting through the endless darkness of space. A small cry for help that almost no one noticed. The message came from a planet called Tvarin Prime, home of the Tvarin Collective, a gentle and intelligent species known for their art, healing, and peaceful ways. They were not warriors. Their ships were made for exploration, not battle. Their cities were full of libraries and gardens, not fortresses. For centuries, they had lived quietly among the stars, believing that peace and kindness were enough to survive in a vast and dangerous galaxy. But that belief was about to be shattered. The Tvarin world was burning. The sky was filled with fire as enemy ships, dark, jagged, and full of weapons, poured into their system. These were the Dareth, a cruel and powerful empire that believed strength was everything and mercy was weakness. They conquered world after world, leaving nothing behind but chains and ashes. When they reached Tvarin space, they saw only easy prey. The Tvarin tried to talk, to reason, to plead for peace, but the Dareth didn't come to talk. They came to conquer. In the first few days, entire colonies were wiped out. The Terran defense fleet, small and outdated, fought bravely but couldn't hold the line. Every time a Tvarin ship fell, thousands of lives were lost. Their planetary shields failed one after another. Cities that had stood for hundreds of years were turned to glowing ruins. Families ran into underground shelters, hoping to survive a little longer. But deep down, everyone knew there was no hope left. They were facing extinction. The leaders of the Tvarin Council gathered in a damaged command center surrounded by the sounds of explosions. They had tried calling for help from nearby civilizations, but no one answered. Some feared the Dareth too much to get involved. Others simply didn't care. The Tvarin were alone in their darkest hour. That was when one of their scientists proposed something, desperate to send a universal distress signal, one that would travel across all known space. It would be weak, maybe too weak, but it was their last chance. The council hesitated. The idea was dangerous. A wide broadcast could attract scavengers, pirates, or even more enemies. But the alternative was certain death. Finally, the high speaker of the council stood and said, "If there's anyone out there who can hear us, anyone who still believes in mercy, please help us." The message was sent. For hours, the signal spread through the void. It bounced off dying stars and drifted past frozen moons. The Terran waited, praying that someone, anyone, would hear, but nothing happened. The Dareth continued their attack, breaking through the last orbital defenses on the surface of Teen Prime. People watched the sky glow red as enemy ships rained fire down. The air was thick with smoke, and every moment felt like the end. Then, light years away in the quiet orbit of Mars, a human deep space listening station detected something strange. At first, the operators thought it was just static, some random noise from deep space, but as they filtered the signal, a pattern emerged. Then a voice, weak, trembling, and full of despair, spoke through the static. "This is the Tvarin Collective. We are under attack. Our people are dying. Please, if anyone can hear us, we need help." The room went silent. The humans stared at each other, realizing what they had just heard. An intelligent alien race, real living beings, and was asking for help. Within minutes, the message was relayed to Earth's Central Command. Scientists confirmed the source, and the recording spread like wildfire through every communication channel. Humanity had dreamed of finding life beyond Earth, but no one imagined the first contact would come as a cry for help. The United Terran Coalition, Earth's united government, immediately called an emergency session. In a massive orbital meeting hall, military leaders, politicians, and scientists gathered to decide what to do. The room buzzed with debate. Some argued that humanity shouldn't get involved, that it was too dangerous to fight a galactic war they didn't understand. Others said they had no right to ignore a species begging for help. The room grew tense as voices rose. But then an older admiral stood up. She had seen war, she had seen loss, and her voice carried the weight of experience. She simply said, "We have a rule. We don't ignore an SOS." That sentence ended the argument. Orders were given immediately. The Terran fleet, the most powerful military force humanity had ever built, began to prepare for launch. Massive carriers, dreadnoughts, and destroyers left their docks one by one. Engineers loaded relief supplies. Medics volunteered by the thousands, and soldiers checked their weapons in silence. Humanity was not going to war for conquest or revenge. They were going to help strangers in need. Back on Terran Prime, the skies grew darker. The Dareth were preparing their final strike. The Tvarin people, tired and broken, gathered in their temples and shelters, whispering prayers to gods who no longer seemed to hear them. The high speaker stood in the ruins of the council hall, staring at the stars, wondering if their signal had reached anyone at all. The night sky was full of enemy fire, and the last of their defenses were falling. It seemed that the end had finally come. And then something changed. The Dareth ships began to pick up strange readings. Large, fast-moving energy signatures entering the system. They assumed it was a trick or maybe another Tiver trap, but then the readings multiplied, dozens of them, hundreds. Space itself seemed to tremble. The commanders barked orders, trying to make sense of it. Then out of the darkness, new ships appeared, massive, sleek, and armed to the teeth. Their hulls bore a single insignia, a blue sphere surrounded by stars, the mark of the Terran coalition. The human chat arrived. They didn't send diplomats or negotiators. They sent their fleet to the D-Teeth. It was madness. An unknown species daring to challenge them head-on. But to the Taveran, it was a miracle. Across burning skies and shattered cities, survivors looked up and saw flashes of light as the human ships opened fire. Precision strikes cut through the Dareth lines. Missiles and railguns lit up the darkness. The battle that had seemed lost began to turn. For the Terran, it was impossible to believe. They had sent a message into the void, expecting silence. Instead, the void had answered not with mercy alone, but with fury. The Deathworlders, as the galaxy would one day call them, had heard their cry for help. And when humanity heard an SOS, they didn't hesitate, they came. Far above the red surface of Mars, where silence ruled the stars, a human deep space relay floated quietly in orbit. It was just another night for the small crew working there. A few engineers monitoring data, a communications officer half asleep at his console, and the hum of machines filling the still air. Most days nothing unusual ever happened. The universe was big, cold, and mostly empty. But that night everything changed. A faint signal came through, so weak that the system almost ignored it. At first it sounded like static, just a whisper buried in the noise of space. The communication officer leaned forward, curious, and began to clean up the transmission. The sound became clearer, forming words no human had ever heard before. The voice was trembling, desperate, speaking in a strange rhythm that didn't match any known human language. Automatic translators tried to make sense of it, breaking down the patterns, analyzing tone and structure. And then slowly the message appeared on screen in plain text. It said, "This is the Teveran Collective. We are under attack. Our worlds are falling. Please, and if anyone can hear us, we need help." The officer froze. His hand shook as he stared at the message. For a moment he thought it had to be some kind of prank or maybe a strange echo from deep space. But when the transmission repeated, weak and broken, he knew it was real. His voice trembled as he called his superior officer. Within minutes, the entire relay was active. Lights flashed. Systems that hadn't been used in years came to life. The signal was verified, recorded, and transmitted straight to Earth. By morning, every major space agency and defense command on the planet had received the same message. Humanity spread across Earth. Mars and several orbital colonies had just heard a cry for help from another intelligent species. The news spread like fire. Scientists were stunned. The general public was speechless. For generations, humans had searched for signs of life beyond Earth. But no one ever expected first contact to sound like a plea for rescue. Within hours, an emergency meeting was called on Earth. Representatives from every nation gathered in the massive orbital headquarters of the Terran Coalition, the United Government of Humanity. Military leaders, diplomats, scientists, and analysts filled the room. On a large screen, the Teveran's recorded message played again. The voice, and soft, tired, and full of fear, echoed through the chamber. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the debate began. Some wanted to help immediately. They argued that ignoring the SOS would make humanity no better than the conquerors, attacking the Terran. If they're peaceful, one diplomat said, they deserve our help. We were once weak. 2. We know what it's like to fight for survival, but others were afraid. We didn't even know who's fighting who. The general warned. What if it's a trap? What if these aliens are using us to destroy ourselves? Memories of Earth's old wars. The centuries of conflict before humanity finally united still haunted many. They had seen how compassion could be used as a weapon. The room filled with voices, arguments, doubts, and fears. The scientists said the Tevarin seemed harmless. The strategists warned of danger. The politicians hesitated, afraid to commit to a war. So far from home. Then, from the back of the chamber, an old admiral stood up. She had served in the last great conflict that had nearly torn humanity apart. Her uniform was simple, her face lined with age, but her voice was calm and steady. She said, We've come too far to forget who we are. When we were drowning, others pulled us from the dark. When disaster struck, someone always answered. That is what makes us human. She paused and looked around the room. We don't ignore an SOS. The word struck deep. The room went silent. Every soldier, every scientist, every leader felt it. Humanity had once sent its own cries for help. During wars, during disasters, during moments of despair, and every time someone had answered. Now another species was asking for the same mercy. The decision was made. Within hours, the order went out across all human space. The Terran Coalition fleet was to mobilize. From shipyards orbiting Earth to bases hidden beneath the ice of Europa, the call spread. Prepare for deployment. Massive carriers were fueled, their engines glowing with blue light. Dreadnoughts, the giants of war, powered up their reactors. Thousands of engineers and crew members worked without sleep, checking systems, loading supplies, preparing for the unknown. But it wasn't just warships. Medical frigates, supply transports, and relief cruisers joined the fleet. Humanity wasn't just going to fight. They were going to help rebuild whatever remained. Soldiers trained for battle while doctors and scientists prepared to save lives. Families on Earth watched the news as fleets of gleaming ships rose from the atmosphere, climbing toward the stars. Children pointed to the skies, asking where the humans were going. Parents answered softly. They're going to help someone who called for us. To the Tyveran, the speed of humanity's response was impossible to understand. No known species could assemble such a massive force so quickly. They didn't know that humans were born from struggle. That unity forged in centuries of chaos had made them strong and fast when it mattered most. To humanity, it wasn't about power or pride. It was instinct. In a matter of days, the fleet was ready. Thousands of ships, millions of souls. From orbit above Earth and Mars, the Armada shimmered like a sea of stars. The crews waited for final orders, knowing that they were about to step into the unknown. Inside one of the command ships, Admiral Reyes, the same woman who had spoken at the council, stood before her officers. We don't know what waits for us out there, she said. But someone cried for help. We will answer, and we will show the stars what it means to be human. Across the fleet, her words were broadcast. The soldiers cheered quietly. The medics checked their equipment one last time. The pilots whispered goodbyes to the people they loved. Engines roared to life, filling the dark with light. Then, one by one, the ships jumped into the unknown, faster than light, beyond human charts, following the coordinates of the Terran distress signal. For the Terran, their last hope had been a message sent into the void. For humanity, it became a test of everything they stood for. They didn't go because they were heroes. They went because they couldn't ignore a voice asking for help. And as the stars blurred into streaks of light, every human aboard those ships carried the same quiet thought. We've never met them. We don't know their faces, but they need us. That was enough. By the time the human fleet reached Tavaran space, the war was almost over and not in the Tavarans' favor. Their last defense lines were collapsing. Their skies were full of burning wrecks. The Darth, cruel and merciless, had surrounded Terran Prime completely. The planet cities were already in flames, and its oceans boiled from orbital bombardments. In a few more minutes, the entire civilization would be gone, families huddled together in underground shelters, whispering prayers to stars that no longer answered. The leaders in their bunkers had already accepted that this would be the end of their people. And then in the cold dark beyond the system, something new appeared. Dozens of massive objects dropped out of faster-than-light travel, their signatures strange and powerful. Not Teen, not Dareth, but something completely unknown. For a brief moment, no one understood what was happening. The Darth commanders assumed it was a sensor glitch or some new trick from the dying Terran. They ignored it. But moments later, their mistake became clear. The darkness of space suddenly lit up. From the edge of the system, the Terran Coalition fleet arrived in full force. Human ships, vast, armored, and burning with energy, moved into formation. They were unlike anything the Dareth had ever seen. The largest of them were kilom long, bristling with weapons, flanked by squadrons of smaller ships darting in tight, perfect coordination. These were not exploration vessels or fragile scientific craft. These were warships built from centuries of conflict, shaped by a history of survival on a deadly world called Earth, a place the galaxy would one day name the Death World. The Tavaran, watching from the surface, saw strange lights forming patterns in their sky. At first they thought it was the Drath finishing them off. But then the bombardment stopped. Silence hung for a moment, and then the stars exploded. The first human strike hit with terrifying precision. A Dareth command ship, massive and heavily armored, was torn apart in a single blast. The explosion lit up the darkness like a sunrise. Before the Dareth fleet could react, another ship followed, and then another. The humans attacked in perfect rhythm, fast, coordinated, and utterly ruthless. Their weapons were not designed to impress but to end battles quickly. Every shot counted. On board the Dareth flagship, chaos spread. Alarms blared, officers shouted, and crew members scrambled to understand who these attackers were. The commander roared orders to fire back to target the newcomers. Dozens of plasma cannons turned and unleashed bright beams of energy toward the human ships. But the humans had seen worse. Their ships twisted aside, shields flaring, countermeasures deployed. Then came their reply. Railgun rounds traveling at near light speed, missiles that thought for themselves, beams that sliced through armor as if it were paper. One Dareth ship tried to flee. It never made it. A human destroyer moved and cut across its path and fired once. The Dareth vessel shattered into fragments that spun silently through the void. From the surface of Terran Prime, the survivors looked up in awe. The night sky, once full of fire and despair, now shimmered with streaks of light, trails from human ships as they danced through battle like metal angels. The explosions high above looked almost beautiful. The people whispered, unsure if they were witnessing salvation or the final end. One elder fell to his knees, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "The stars. The stars are fighting for us." The Dareth, on the other hand, were trapped in terror. They had fought many enemies before, weak, frightened races that begged for mercy. But these newcomers didn't beg. They didn't even speak. They simply acted. Every movement, every strike showed experience, the kind that came only from surviving endless wars. The Darth commanders realized too late what they were facing. Deathworlders. Beings evolved on a planet that killed the weak and sharpened the strong. To fight humans was to fight creatures forged by gravity, pain, and fire. As the battle raged, communication finally opened between the human command ship and the Tiveran Council. The image of a human admiral appeared on the Tvernan's flickering screens. Her uniform was black, her face calm but focused. Behind her, the bridge glowed with tactical holograms and flashing lights. She spoke only a few words. "We've received your distress call. Hold your ground. You're not alone anymore." The Terran didn't even know how to respond. Some wept. Others simply stared, unable to believe that another species had come to save them. In orbit, the Drath tried to regroup. Their flagship, surrounded by smaller vessels, attempted to rally its forces, but the humans didn't give them time. A formation of Terran cruisers closed in, their engines glowing bright blue. A volley of kinetic rounds slammed into the DTH ships, breaking their formation. Missiles followed, guided by human AI systems that anticipated every enemy move. It wasn't just an attack. It was a display of precision, discipline, and controlled fury. The Dareth realized they weren't facing an empire. They were facing survivors, a species that had learned long ago how to turn desperation into power. The humans didn't come to negotiate or to conquer. They came to end the war. On the Tiveran surface, news spread quickly. People emerged from bunkers, looking up at the sky. The sounds of bombardment had stopped. Children pointed at the lights, asking their parents who the new ships belonged to. No one had an answer yet, but they all felt it. A strange sense of hope returning after so long. Meanwhile, aboard one of the Terran ships, soldiers and pilots worked with machine-like focus. Every order was followed instantly. Every movement was rehearsed. They were not fighting for glory or for fame. They were fighting because someone had asked for help. Within hours, the battle that had once seemed lost began to turn completely. The Dareth fleet, once proud and confident, was reduced to burning wrecks drifting in the void. Those who tried to escape were hunted down. Those who surrendered were disarmed and detained. Humanity's arrival had transformed a hopeless tragedy into a stunning reversal. When the last Dareth ship exploded, a strange calm fell over Tvar in space. The stars which had burned so brightly during the battle now shimmered quietly again. The war was over. The Tiveran looked up at those silent stars and realized that their cry for help had not vanished into the void. Someone had heard them. Someone had come. In the history that followed, the galaxy would speak of that night in hushed tones. The Dareth called it the night of the burning sky. The Tiveran called it the day the stars fought back. But humanity called it something simpler, a rescue mission. Because for the Terran, this wasn't an invasion or an act of conquest. It was a response to a plea for help. And when the humans heard SOS, they didn't hesitate. They didn't question, and they didn't stop until the threat was gone. To the Tiverine, the humans were saviors, beings who brought both mercy and might. To the Dareth, they were monsters, predators from a world too harsh to imagine. But one truth spread across the stars that day. When Death Worlders arrived, the universe learns that mercy and wrath can wear the same face. The Dareth fleet, once feared across dozens of star systems, was now nothing more than wreckage drifting in silence. What had once been a symbol of terror and dominance had fallen apart under the relentless precision of human strategy. The Dareth had fought countless wars before, crushing every civilization that stood against them. But they had never faced an enemy like the Terran. Humanity didn't rely on brute strength alone. They fought with intelligence, coordination, and unbreakable resolve. Every move of the Terran fleet was part of a larger plan. The human ships moved as one, each covering the other's blind spots. Each attack calculated to weaken the DTH's formation. Where the Dareth fought with arrogance and fury, the humans fought with unity and purpose. Within hours, the once mighty Darth Armada was broken apart. Ships that had ruled the stars for centuries were now burning wrecks, drifting helplessly through the void. On the surface of Tavarin Prime, silence replaced the sounds of battle. The endless bombardments had stopped. The people stepped out from underground shelters, their eyes wide as they looked toward the sky. Smoke filled the air, cities lay in ruins, but above them the stars no longer burned red with fire. Instead, they shimmered softly with the lights of human ships. For the first time in generations, the Terran felt something they thought they had lost forever: hope. But humanity didn't stop after the fighting ended. For them, victory wasn't about destruction, it was about restoration. The moment the last Darth ship was gone, new orders were sent across the Terran fleet. Medical ships were to descend to the surface. Engineers, medics, and scientists were to deploy immediately. The war was over, but the work had just begun. From orbit, hundreds of dropships left the human carriers, streaking through the atmosphere like silver comets. They landed in the ruined cities where smoke still rose from the ashes. The hatches opened and humans in white and gray suits stepped out, not soldiers with weapons, but doctors with medical packs and engineers carrying tools. They moved through the streets quietly, scanning for survivors, calling out in calm voices. The Terran, frightened and weak, peeked from behind broken walls and collapsed buildings. They had seen nothing but death for months, and at first they didn't know if these new beings were truly there to help. But when the humans began handing out food, water, and medicine, the fear slowly faded. Human soldiers, still wearing armor marked by battle scars, knelt beside Tavarin children and offered them water. They set up shelters made from the remains of their drop pods. They shared their own rations with survivors who hadn't eaten in days. To the Tiverine, it was beyond belief. Just hours ago, these same humans had brought fire and thunder from the sky. Now they were helping rebuild what had been destroyed. In one city, a human engineer team worked side by side with terrain builders to restore power to a damaged medical center. The Tevern had never seen technology like human machinery, strong, simple, and efficient. Yet despite the differences, the two species worked together easily, communicating through gestures and translated words. When the lights flickered back to life, the Tyveran doctors broke down in tears. For them, it wasn't just power returning, it was life returning. Across the planet, similar scenes unfolded. Human scientists tested the air and soil, helping Tiveran farmers restore what could be saved. Medical teams treated burns, injuries, and disease outbreaks caused by the invasion. Even human soldiers who had spent years training for war now found themselves cradling wounded Tiveran civilians, comforting them as if they were their own people. The Tyveran elders who had once believed their civilization would vanish now watched in disbelief as these strange visitors, these Deathworlders from a faraway blue planet, worked tirelessly to heal instead of harm. The elders couldn't understand it. The Dreth had brought death and humanity had brought destruction too. Yet somehow the humans' destruction had saved them. And now those same humans were rebuilding everything they had broken. One evening, as the fires across the horizon began to fade and the sun dipped behind the shattered skyline, a Tavaran elder requested to meet with the human admiral leading the operation. She was the same woman whose voice had first reached them after the humans arrived, calm, steady, and full of quiet authority. The meeting took place in what was once the Terran Council Hall, now a half-ruined structure filled with the smell of smoke and dust. The elder, his body frail but his eyes bright with curiosity, stood before her. Around them, human engineers worked silently to repair what they could. The elder looked at the admiral and asked in a trembling voice, "Why? Why would your people come so far, risk so much for a world that means nothing to you?" You lost ship soldiers' lives. Off for strangers. The Admiral was quiet for a moment. She looked out through the broken wall where the stars shimmered faintly in the night sky. Her uniform was dusty, her face lined from years of command. But her eyes held a calm warmth. Finally, she turned to him and said softly, "Because someone called for help, and that's what we do." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that the elder could feel deep in his heart. There was no pride in her tone, no expectation of reward, just truth. Humanity hadn't come for glory, conquest, or resources. They came because they couldn't stand the sound of a desperate voice going unanswered. Fielder lowered his head, emotion filling his chest. For centuries, the Tane had believed that kindness was weakness, that the strong ruled the stars. But in that moment, he understood what true strength was. Strength wasn't in domination or destruction. It was in compassion. It was in the courage to cross the stars to help those you had never met. As days turned into weeks, Terran Prime slowly began to heal. Human ships continued to deliver supplies and machinery. The once broken cities started to show signs of life again. Children who had once known only fear now laughed as they played near the human camps. Some Tyvine even began learning human words, teaching their own language in return. Bonds were being formed, the kind of connections that would one day shape the entire galaxy. Meanwhile, far above the planet, the human fleet remained in silent orbit. Many of the ships bore scars from battle. Hulls scorched, engines damaged. Yet none of them withdrew until the Tivaran could stand on their own again. The Terran coalition had made a promise, and humanity always kept its promises. Before the fleet finally departed, the Tivaran people gathered in the central plaza of their rebuilt capital. They lit lanterns that floated up into the sky, each one carrying a message of thanks. From the ground, they looked like tiny stars rising to meet the real ones. The humans watched quietly, some smiling, some wiping away tears. No one knew if they would ever meet again. But one thing was certain. The Terran would never forget the day humanity came, not just as warriors, but as saviors, healers, and friends. And somewhere deep in space on the bridge of her ship, Admiral Reyes watched the glowing lights fade into the distance. She thought about the question the Elder had asked her, and she smiled faintly. Humanity didn't need a reason to help. It was simply who they were. Because when someone calls for help, humanity answers every time. Years passed and peace slowly returned to Tvaran Prime. The scars of war remained on the planet's surface. Burned cities, broken towers, and craters where once there had been homes. But the people rebuilt. They rebuilt not just their cities, but their spirit. Above their world, high in orbit, where the stars glittered endlessly, something new appeared. A monument unlike any ever made before. It wasn't made of stone or marble. It was made of metal. Steel salvaged from the wrecks of human ships that had fought and fallen in defense of the Tavaran. Each piece of metal had once been part of a ship that never returned home. A ship whose crew had given their lives to protect a world that wasn't even their own. Now those fragments had been joined together into a single shining structure that drifted peacefully above the planet. It caught the light of Terran's sun and gleamed like a silver star, a symbol of both sacrifice and hope. Every few hours its surface would flash as sunlight struck its engraved panels, and if anyone came close enough to read what was written there, they would find words carved in every language known to humans, and Terran alike. Help asked, help given. Just 4 simple words, yet they carried the weight of everything that had happened. It was not a slogan of victory or power. It was a promise, a message that would never fade. Even as centuries passed, it reminded everyone who saw it that when the Tivarine cried for help, humanity answered. The monument became a sacred place for both species. Terran ships would pass beneath it and blink their lights in salute. Human fleets, when patrolling near Tivarine space, would alter their course just slightly, enough to pass by the monument to honor those who had fallen. Some of the human ships even played soft music as they drifted past. A quiet song used by Terran sailors to remember those who never came home. Over time, that story and the tale of the day humanity came to Terran Prime spread across the stars. Traders, explorers, and scholars carried it from one system to another in the far reaches of space. Even those who had never seen a human ship knew the legend. They told of how the Tyver sent a desperate SOS, how the Dareth fleet Kamedo conquer, and how humanity answered the call not with negotiation, but with thunder. They said that the skies above Tivaran burned brighter than any sunrise as the Terran fleets descended. They told how the DTH, once feared as unstoppable, were crushed under the combined power of human coordination and will. But what made the story legendary wasn't just the war. It was what came after. In the aftermath, when the Tiverine expected cruelty or control, humanity instead brought kindness. They sent medics, engineers, and aid workers. They shared food and medicine. They rebuilt homes and repaired hospitals, and when asked why they did it, the human admiral had given an answer so simple, so pure that it became eternal, because someone called for help. And that's what we do. That line, along with the monument's words, became part of galactic culture. It was repeated in classrooms, quoted in speeches, and sung in songs. For the Tiverine, it was a symbol of rebirth, a moment that turned their near extinction into a new beginning. For humanity, it was a reminder of what they stood for. Not conquest, not empire, but compassion and duty. Even the Dareth, the once proud empire that had caused so much suffering, learned to fear those words. After the defeat at Terran Prime, the Darth fleets withdrew from several border systems. They avoided human space, their admirals refusing to engage Terran forces unless absolutely necessary. They understood now what others would come to learn in time. That when humanity fights, they fight like a storm. But unlike other conquerors, humanity didn't leave ashes behind them. They left rebuilt cities, grateful survivors, and monuments shining in the dark. To the Dareth, that was terrifying. To everyone else, it was inspiring. As generations passed, children across many worlds learned about the Battle of Terran Prime in their studies. They learned about the Darth invasion, the desperate SOS, and the moment when the Terran coalition answered the call. But what truly captured their imaginations was the part that followed. How the destroyers of worlds became healers, how the so-called Deathworlders showed mercy after fury. Poets wrote about it. Artists painted the image of human soldiers handing food to alien children under a broken sky. Composers wrote symphonies inspired by the event, music that began with thunder and ended in quiet peace, and every retelling carried the same message that strength and kindness can live in the same heart. For the Tiverine people, the monument became a pilgrimage site. Every year they sent a ceremonial shuttle up into orbit, filled with flowers and small offerings made from local metals and crystals. They would attach them to the monument's base and say a few words of thanks. Not "O gods" or kings, but to the humans who came when no one else would. Some families even named their children after the human ships that had fallen, names like Valor, Endeavor, and Reyes, in memory of those who had given their lives. The monument itself never stopped glowing. Over the years, new layers of metal were added to replace what time and cosmic dust eroded. But the original plates, the ones made from the destroyed ships, were never replaced. They remained untouched, a reminder that beauty can rise from sacrifice. Even the stars around Terran seemed to carry the story. Spacefarers often said that when they passed near that system, the stars looked brighter, as if the light of those who died still lingered there, watching over the planet they saved. Some called it superstition, others said it was truth. But no one denied what the story had come to mean. Across the galaxy, civilizations began to see humans in a new light. They were still feared. After all, they came from a world known as a death world, a place where even the trees could kill. But now that fear was mixed with respect. The galaxy had seen what humanity could do when roused, and they had seen what came after the storm. Compassion, rebuilding, and peace. For the Tiver, hope returned. They rebuilt their cities with human help, established schools, hospitals, and trade routes. They joined the wider galactic community, not as victims, but as partners. And every time they looked up at the night sky, the monument reminded them that they were not alone, that somewhere out there across the cold dark of space, humanity still listened for the next SOS. Millennia would pass and empires would rise and fall. New species would discover the stars. But the story of Terran Prime would never fade. It became part of the shared memory of the galaxy, a lesson written not in books but in hearts. Whenever a distress call was sent, those who remembered whispered the same words. When Deathworlders' answer, mercy and fury arrived together, it was both a warning and a promise, a reminder that humanity's strength was not only in its weapons, but in its will to protect, to heal, and to stand beside those who cried for help. And so the monument continued to orbit Terran Prime, silent and shining. The steel of fallen ships gleamed in the starlight, carrying the story of humanity's greatest act, and not of war, but of compassion forged through sacrifice. It waited there, patient and eternal, for as long as the stars would shine.